Everyone? All right, is it time?
I don't know what already started. Teachers have been service today.
I think that's in there. I don't know.
I was pleased.
Okay, we're ready to go? Okay. What's the August 23rd? 26th. The August 26th meeting of the East Penn Board of School Directors is hereby called to order. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First order of business is the request to address the board. I have none. Then approval of minutes. I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Next is our report from the superintendent. Mrs. Campbell?
Good evening. As you can appreciate, the past 2 weeks for us in East Penn have been action-packed as we prepared for today, our students' first day back. Our welcome back events actually began on August 15th, and that's when we welcomed approximately 20 new teachers at our new teacher orientation fair. And the following week, the week of August 19th to the 21st, our teachers participated in professional learning in preparation for this upcoming school year. And then last Thursday, August 22nd, we officially kicked off the school year with all of our staff at Emmaus High School. All of our staff from throughout the district, the events were held at Emmaus High School. This year, we enjoyed much laughter, camaraderie, as staff from each building participated in a game, an inaugural game of our East Penn Family Feud. And then we were inspired by Angela Myers, who's an author, entrepreneur, and international keynote speaker. And in her keynote, entitled You Matter, Angela reminded all of us of the critical role that we all play in the East Penn organization. I just wanted to take a moment to thank those board members as well whose schedules allowed them to join us, Dr. Bacher, Mr. Bird, Mr. Smith, and Mr. Jankowski. And today, August 26th, we welcome back approximately 8,300 students to our schools. As I visited buildings across the district, I continued to be amazed at the activities that teachers and principals planned to make the day memorable for our students. Some of the notable activities, there was a human game of Hungry Hungry Hippo at one of our middle schools, building-wide scavenger hunts for students to get to know teachers and layouts of new buildings, and motivational speakers, just to name a few. I also wanted to take a moment to provide the community and the board with an update with regard to transportation. Certainly, given the large number of students in the district that we safely transport to and from school, that's a tremendous feat. A special thanks to Andrew Kralik from STA, who's here, as well as Dr. Mirabella, who works very closely with STA. As you know, I had shared with you the timeline in terms of all of our bus communication that went out to parents. We had a day the week before school started in which our bus drivers actually made test runs of their routes so that they were comfortable with those locations. And we were making changes and updates to routes up until 5 p.m. on Friday, August 23rd, so that we can address any parent concerns that may have come in. I also want to note then that members of STA administration were in over the weekend to continue to monitor phone calls and make any changes that needed to happen for our students. STA continued to take phone messages, check social media messages throughout the weekend, and tried to be certainly proactive in addressing any parent concerns before today, the start of the school. This morning, our STA, overall our transportation, we believe went very well. Certainly, we know that runs were a bit later than usual in some locations. In particular, some of our special need buses took a little bit longer than it had anticipated, but certainly some of that lateness is what could be expected on a typical first day. STA continues to monitor the routes and make new changes as students register, and certainly any changes that are made will be communicated to parents. The other update that I want to share is with regard to our Willow Lane kindergarten enrollment. This summer, in particular, the last 2 weeks, I would say, we've seen a significant number of new registrations district-wide, particularly at Willow Lane Elementary in kindergarten. And as of August 26th, so as of today, we have 104 kindergarten students who, as of right now, would be divided among 4 kindergarten sections, which results in 26 kindergartners per section. We believe those class sizes are too large, and as a result, the board will notice on the addendum this evening the recommendation to hire a teacher and add an additional section of kindergarten at Willow Lane, which would take our class sizes at that building to 20. We have as well considered other options to address this particular concern. And certainly while we understand from a parent and a community perspective that there are challenges when you have students meeting one teacher on the first day, recognizing that they then this week may be transitioning to another kindergarten, we recognize that that's a challenge for us. But certainly when we think about the long-term impact and the advantage of being able to have those students in a smaller class size for the remainder of the school year, ideally from tomorrow on through June, certainly that advantage far outweighs any logistical situations through which we may have had to work early on this week. Willow Lane does have classroom space available, and on the addendum, again, there is a recommendation for a candidate to fill that position. It's currently on there as a full-time sub, which means it's in there as a one-year position. We do recognize, however, I will share that when we look at our enrollment moving forward, there is the possibility that we will continue to need that teacher in future years as well. And finally, I'd like to conclude my report this evening by sharing with the board and the community a brief, about 5-minute video that we showed as part of our opening day activities on August 22nd. And this video was created by Mr. Mike Mahalik, who's a member of our C&I leadership team, and really provides a glimpse of an East Penn education from a student's perspective. And for us, on August 22nd, it really reinforced that message of you matter.
biggest source of inspiration for everybody. You were the creative lighthouse in the classroom that everybody was able to go towards, that, even if we messed up our projects, there was a way that you could fix it, and there was always a way for you to make it seem like it was going to be okay, and there was no right or wrong answer to anything. It was just, everything was positive, and there was nothing ever, too bad to fix in that case, and it just made everybody feel like there was a sense of comfort.
She was just super kind and super nice to everybody. She always had a positive attitude towards everything, and she actually taught me how to play guitar. One day she came out with one of her guitars and she started playing it for the class, and we were like, where'd you learn how to play guitar? And she said she taught herself when she was 13. So I was just really nilly. I was like, I wish I could play guitar. She's like, well, I can teach you. And I was just like, really? But I don't have a guitar. So she actually brought a guitar for me. Her guitar, when she was 13, she gave it to me, and she stayed after school every single Monday to teach me how to play guitar, an hour after everybody left and everything. And she would bring song notes, and if a string broke, she would just make sure to buy me an extra one and everything. So she would just tell me stories about her life.
You matter because not only do you make the effort to have us be in a respectful environment with one another in class, but you also take the next step in being probably the nicest person I've ever met, the sweetest person. As a teacher, as a person, I see in the hallways when people have earbuds in, and some teachers are like, take that off, they're yelling at the kids or the hoodies. You're super nice. You go, could you please take those off? Your behavior, your maturity, your ethics never waver even when kids are being disrespectful. That hits us. That makes us rethink how we act, and we're super grateful for you for that.
There was about a week in the middle of the school year where he spoke only French to us and said that we were going to have a test in French at the end of the week. And then instead of the test on Friday, he explained to us that that's how some students feel all the time, and there's some people who do get lost like that and don't know what's happening or what's going on. And he said that we need to be understanding and including of them, even though we were honor students and couldn't necessarily relate to them. And it just taught a lot of life lessons rather than history lessons. So he still has an impact in my life rather than learning what happened in World War II.
You matter because when I started doing track, I didn't have confidence in myself, and you told me that I can achieve great things and I had confidence in myself. And when I first started, I didn't believe that I would be good. I didn't think I would be good enough. But you made me feel like I was good enough, and you helped me achieve great things throughout the school year. When I finally achieved it, you were the first person there, right in my corner, to tell me that I would do it, even when I didn't believe I would do it. So I think that's why you matter so much.
She really understood me as a person. Instead of seeing me as another student, she saw me as an individual that had his own needs and his own problems, and her leniency really led me to kind of respect teachers more.
She's always just taught me to keep going and keep doing what I do, and she just helped me through things that were rough.
You matter because I think you really helped me out through my first year here, and it really helped calm me down considering it was the first year in high school, and I'm glad when I do see you in the hallways and I get to say hi and everything.
He's been very supportive of me, pushing me to where I need to get to be a better basketball player, and Jesse's been supportive.
She's a great teacher, she's an influencer, she's a guider, and I can't wait to see, how she does this with other students, because she definitely impacted me, and I really appreciate her for that, so I want you to thank her for that. So.
You matter because you saw when I was down and upset about something, and you pulled me aside and made me feel better and didn't ever want to see me upset, and made school a place where I could be happy and have fun.
They were fun teachers to be with. They made learning about the subject they taught fun. They were fun people in general. They were always happy. They always had a smile on their face. It was a pleasant class to be in with them.
He always made our homeroom a very fun environment, and on the last day of school of IRE for my 8th grade year, when we went on lockdown, he made us all feel like we were really safe and comfortable and in a good environment, and if something were to happen, he would protect us and keep us safe.
We had a big friend group, and we just happened to all be in his homeroom, and he acted like a dad for the group, and he kind of shepherded us through that transition from middle school to high school, and he was a big impact.
Because they help me feel brave, and that they help me stuff that I'll need in the future.
She made every one of her students feel important, and she made sure that every one of us would succeed in her class.
He mentored me on other things than just schoolwork, like how to respect others and how to be hardworking.
I was falling behind in my English class, and I had a big project coming up, so she took me after school and she helped me out with that without me even asking. She knew that I needed the help, and I was going through a really rough time, which she didn't know at all, and just her helping me with the project helped me get through the year.
She was someone that you could always go up to and talk to. She was very funny, and she made class very enjoyable.
He made a relationship with each of his students, and it was fun and easy to learn in his class.
Because not only was he my teacher, he was kind of a life coach, because he coached me in soccer for 5 years.
Because she taught me that tests aren't the things that make you, you make yourself.
She was the one that really got me into art, and she's why I wanted to become an art teacher. And she was just really supportive throughout all my years.
Well, teachers teach those kids how to make these amazing things. Like someday they might invent flying cars, someday they might save lives, someday they might even save the world from a dangerous disease or something. And that matters to me because I want to make the world a better place too. I want to be a teacher when I grow up, and teachers are teaching me how to teach so I can help those kids invent more too.
Feel so good. They make me feel so strong. They make me believe in myself. They make me feel I am so special, even I am not. Even I don't know anything, they make me feel that I know so much things. And I love them.
And that concludes my report.
Are there any questions or comments? Dr. Levinson?
Yeah, I have a few. First, I really enjoyed that video. That was great. Second, I'd just like to compliment the administration on handling the kindergarten teacher situation so quickly with Willow Lane. That leads to my third point, which I know we've talked about this before, but I think the unexpected bump in kindergarten students, I think, does suggest some urgency with which to pursue the demographic survey, just to see what else is in the pipeline and how it's going to move through grades subsequently. Thank you.
Mr. Ballard?
Yeah, I would like to build on Dr. Levinson's comment. Taking a look at the number of actual classrooms we have available in the district, I believe the total is 6, and that's not evenly distributed across all the schools. Many of the elementary schools have 0 classrooms available as of now, and that's, if it were kindergarten students, it'd be 120 students we could accommodate at the current class levels. And if it was a higher grade, maybe we could get up to 25, that would be 150 students. So we've got a margin of only 120 to 150 students in our elementary grade level buildings before we have to start thinking about things to do. And literally, it takes 3 years from the time you decide to build a building, or think you're going to decide to build a building, till you can actually get one on the ground. And in between, if you have to substitute for that lack of building you don't have, that's portables and other things which are not the world's best learning environments. And adding to some schools, it's a very difficult traffic pattern to try to establish for having things have to be outside the building, where you have different levels of security and other things like that that you have to worry about. So I would also urge that we get that demographic study well underway as soon as possible, because we really need to know what our plans need to be for the near future, because we've been growing recently at 100 roughly students a year across the district, and most of them have been in elementary. So we really need to get on the ball about what we're going to do for a long-range plan here, because it's a big deal. There's a lot of things that have to fit in, like bond issues and selecting new architects and getting bids out for buildings and all of this kind of stuff. And like I said, you can't get it up in less than 3 years under the current environment of all of the regulations and things you got to go through. And you always run into problems when you try to build on a new piece of property, for example. If you tried to do it on the Romig tract or one of those others, areas that we had, or add on to one of our buildings or anything like that, you run into environmental issues. One of our schools, we had to do an archaeology study, because it was a place where materials from the Lenape tribe were found in the ground, such as jasper from Jasper Park, and we had to be able to certify that we were not building the building on a major archaeological significant area before we could even add on to some of our buildings. And so there's many pitfalls involved in trying to do anything. So I think we need to get that demographic study in really fast, and so we can start to plan for what we need to do in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. Anyone else have comments? Mr. Jankowski.
I just want to comment on the convocation on Thursday, and having my first opportunity to attend. It was a great event. The enthusiasm was infectious, and I think it just speaks towards a great start for the school year, and I think it was well done.
Dr. Munson?
Because the demographic study came up, I don't disagree with my colleagues who have spoken already about it, but I would also say that while speed may be important, I think quality is more important. I don't think the last demographic study we got was very good. I said that at the time. It turns out it wasn't very good. And so I hope we can get a better one this time. And if that means it takes a little longer, I would rather wait.
Other comments?
In response to two different comments. First, Mr. Jankowski, thank you for your compliments about our convocation, our opening day, and to the credit of an amazing team of individuals who I recognized on that day, who really were a part of the planning of the day, as you can appreciate, to bring that many moving pieces together. One of our instructional technology specialists literally created that Family Feud game from the group that went out and looked at keynote speakers and really sort of identified which individual best matched our needs and our work that we're focusing on this year in the district. So just wanted to again reiterate and thank the group that helped to plan that day. And then to the comment about monitoring enrollment, again, have to really give credit to the strong leadership team. Doug Povolitis, throughout the past 10 days, has probably been in my office almost every single day, really looking at those numbers carefully. And he and Dr. Moyer at Willow Lane have worked strategically over the past several days in terms of working with families and looking at space and interviewing teachers in the event that the board is supportive of the additional section. So thank you as well to Doug and Tony.
I'd also like to thank the teams that planned both the new teacher orientation day and the convocation day. I thought they were both excellent. Moving on to personnel, if there's no objections, I'd like a motion to take items A and B together, the personnel items 1 through 15 with the addendum.
So moved. Second.
So that one correction.
Oh, yes, there's a correction that on the support staff, Stephanie,
I'm sorry, is this on the addendum or the?
On the personnel items, I believe, right?
It's on page 3 of the actual personnel agenda items.
Stephanie Gosbent will be at I or not LMMS, so it's just a location change. Is there any discussion or comments?
The full-time sub?
It's a full-time sub position, yeah.
She's also a per diem sub? In person? Marissa or Micah, both a full-time sub and a per diem? Am I misreading that?
She was in essence being recommended to both lists, yes.
Okay. All right.
Dr. Munson?
Yeah, this is a general point. I'm supportive of these items, and consistent with what Mr. Ballard had said earlier in terms of planning. I think it would be, I'm glad that we can address the issue at Willow Lane, the kindergarten, right away, but knowing that teacher positions are a multi-decade commitment of the district and its resources, I think it behooves us the next time when this comes up around again to sort of see the longer range plan, so we can see where a new position sort of fits in, not just this year, but 2 years, 5 years down the road.
Yeah, just to address an inquiry by the media, the Linda Ballard that's on the agenda tonight is not a relative.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Mrs. Allen, will you call the roll, please?
Did you do the motion?
Yeah.
Okay.
Who was the motion and second?
I made the motion.
Thank you.
And second. And
I was more concerned on making sure you caught the
yes,
correction. Mr. Ballard.
Aye.
Ms. Baumann. Aye. Mr. Byrd.
Aye.
Mr. Champagne.
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski.
Aye.
Dr. Levinson.
Aye.
Dr. Munson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Dr. Bacher.
Aye.
9 ayes.
Motion passes.
And I'd like to introduce, we're very excited to have with us tonight our newest member of our administrative team, Jessica Thatcher, who was on the agenda that you just approved. I'd invite her to come up and, as has been a custom here, she's going to shake each of the board members' hands. While she's doing that, I'll share with you that Jessica has several years of teaching experience at the secondary level, including as an ESL teacher, a science teacher, and an art teacher, and also has leadership experience as a fourth-year member of the leadership team in Allentown.
Welcome aboard.
Thank you so much.
She currently, most recently, is working as an instructional design consultant at Building 21, where she helps to design course curriculum for the programs at Building 21. So we are incredibly excited to have Jessica joining us, and she will be a great addition to the high school leadership team.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to business operations. Item E is for information. Is there any objection to taking items A through D together? May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Dr. Munson?
Yeah, I have a question about the bill list. It's more about the kind of past practice, and it's actually the tuition payment to the Achievement House Cyber Charter School. My understanding is that in the past, we have essentially let the state take our charter school tuition payments out of our essentially out of the check, they cut us rather than cutting a check ourselves. Is that incorrect, or has something changed about that process?
Excuse me, that practice changed 3 years ago when I came. My philosophy is you can control the process better if you are paying them and cutting a check. You can work with them. If you allow the department to withhold, you really lose any ability to discuss with them what's happening. So we, for as long as I've been here now, have paid both the cyber charters and the brick and mortar charters directly.
Was there any financial penalty for, I mean, I take what you said is the advantage, but was there any financial penalty of having the state take it out of our disbursement?
There wasn't a financial penalty. It was simply that if as we monitor the enrollment, if we notice students who have left or there are new students, we're actively looking at that. Whereas whatever they were submitting to the state was simply deducting what they said. Now, there was an end-of-year reconciliation, but again, anything is easier to monitor if you do it a little bit at a time throughout the year rather than waiting till the end of the year to reconcile.
Thank you. I'm actually glad to hear that it's being actively monitored in that way, so thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Mrs. Allen, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Ballard?
Aye.
Ms. Baumann?
Aye.
Mr. Byrd?
Aye.
Mr. Champagne?
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski?
Aye.
Dr. Levinson?
Aye.
Dr. Munson?
Aye.
Dr. Bacher?
Aye.
9 ayes.
Motion passes. Moving on to curriculum, is there any, yes?
I misunderstood. May I make a comment and a question on item E?
Oh, sure.
Well, I'd first like to express my enthusiasm for the windfall that came with the, I imagine it was the Fed rate dropping that contributed to that. So I'm very happy that we moved forward with that decision. I did have one question. I did notice that the fees associated with the transaction were higher than the estimate. Is that because that goes proportional with the value, or?
Sure. So when the savings was minimal, the parties, the attorneys, the financial advisor, and the underwriter were actually shaving their fees down in order to make it work for us. So when the transaction actually realized better savings than had originally been anticipated, they restored their fees to what they ordinarily would be. And so if you look back at the fees we paid on the prior transaction, the fees that are being reflected now are the same as the previous transaction.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, moving on to curriculum, is there any objection to taking educational conferences and school discipline code together? May I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? Mrs. Allen, will you call the roll, please?
Dr. Munson?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Ballard?
Aye.
Ms. Baumann?
Aye.
Mr. Byrd?
Aye.
Mr. Champagne?
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski?
Aye.
Dr. Levinson?
Aye.
Dr. Bacher?
Aye.
9 ayes.
Motion passes. Moving on to Carbon-Lehigh Intermediate Unit. Ms. Bowman, do you have a report?
Yes. The Educational Foundation for Carbon-Lehigh Intermediate Unit had raised money they have a golf tournament and other things that they do to raise money. And they used it recently to buy, I think it was 12 or 13 bicycles that are specially fitted for children who cannot ride an ordinary bike. They were all children in Carbon County so far, and they're hoping to expand this program to Lehigh County. But what is really beautiful is these are kids who had never ridden a bike before, never thought they could ever ride a bike. The bikes are like 3 wheels, so they can't fall over. There's a little handle on the back for a parent or someone to hold on to make sure that, that it doesn't get out of control if they need that. And there's some other safety features built into these bikes. And
we watched a video seeing some of these kids running to the bikes and getting on them for the first time. And it was pretty emotional to be able to see them to be able to experience something that they wouldn't normally be able to experience. And so the intermediate unit is dedicated to bringing this program to Lehigh County. So hopefully some of our students will be able to benefit from this in the near future.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. Spellman? Moving on to LCTI, Mr. Champagne?
Yes, there has been no meeting since June, so I really don't have any report other than to say the welding lab is progressing at a quite rapid rate. So when Dr. Levinson, Mr. Bird, and Mr. Smith and I are up there for the first meeting of this school year, we'll see, I assume, what will be almost a completed welding lab. But I'll have a report next month after we have our meeting in August.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Champagne? Okay, moving on to legislative. Mr. Ballard?
Thank you, Dr. Walker. Well, in case you're wondering why you haven't heard much from the legislature these days, it's because everybody is concentrating on the elections. They all have to, all of the House members have to be reelected, and people are concentrating on that. The only thing that is of interest going on right now in the legislature is a quasi-commission that has been impaneled to look at various proposals for property tax relief again. There are a number of bills that are in the hopper that address some aspect of property tax relief. Those include a bill that calls for capping the property tax payments for people over 65. There's another proposal that calls for solving the revenue problem by raising the personal income tax, the sales tax, and for the first time, taxing retirement income, not Social Security, but pensions, and things from 401ks. And then there's the perennial Act 76 bill, which attempts to replace the property tax with simply sales tax and personal income tax increases. Those are all being considered by this quasi-commission of legislators, and there's supposed to be a report out, strangely enough, after November, I believe, when they will be talking about some of these proposals. They still have a problem with even their independent fiscal office, which says that the property tax collections now are around $17 billion. And just even on the first year to break even, they've got to collect $17 billion to replace all of the property tax. And that takes pretty whopping tax increases on personal income tax and sales tax that would be noticeable by the general public. So that's their first problem. And the second problem that they run into is the independent fiscal office also indicates that there's no inflationary factor built in to most of these proposals, which would say that the only increase you got in any of the spending would be what you got increases in, say, like the sales or the property tax. Well, those are seasonal, if you will. They don't always go up, and they sometimes plateau out, and sometimes they go down. And there's no mechanism in any of the bills so far to account for that, to maintain a level, at least even a level payment field. And the independent fiscal office says that the property taxes are going to be going up at a roughly 3% a year because of the increase in costs due to inflation. So nobody has come up yet with a formula that even replaces yet the 17 billion. So that's what the problem is that they're dealing with. So we'll be hearing more about this quasi-commission sometime, like I said, probably after the election. And it's going to be interesting to try to follow that. So keep tuned and keep talking to your legislature about how the fact is that you can't repeal inflation with legislation. Okay? If it costs 3% more to do the same job next year, which is what inflation says
happens, then you got to have 3% more in revenue the next year to meet that, or you have to cut back on the programs. And the legislature keeps adding programs to us, they don't cut back anything. So again, when you're talking to your legislators at local political gatherings or their open houses or their gun safety forums or whatever, talk to them about the fact that simply replacing initially the sales tax, or excuse me, the property tax with sales and income tax without some kind of cost adder to follow on the following years simply puts everything falling back further and further behind as these taxes don't keep up with the necessary inflation. So that's the main message. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ballard. Are there any questions or comments for Mr. Ballard? Okay, moving on to other items. There was some discussion at the last board meeting about resignation letters on board agendas, so we have a discussion items. I'm wondering if you can discuss what's legally required of us as far as resignation letters on the agenda. And
Sure. So the question that came up at the end of the last meeting was essentially, what, if anything, do you have to include on the agenda? Is it sufficient to simply list a name and the individual who is retiring and the effective retirement date or resignation date, I should say, or must you also include the letter that's attached? And if so, some of the letters now appear to have some parts missing to protect certain confidential information. So that was the discussion last time. At the end of the day, legally, what are you required? All you're required to do is just have a recording of the date that the person is either retired or resigned as of. That's all you're really required. You do not have to include the letters. It's simply backup information. So your call as a board to decide what you want.
okay, is there anyone who wants, Mr. Ballard?
Okay, I brought this issue up, and so I was asking Mr. Fisher what the requirements were and discussing with the board secretary. Right now, the board secretary, in order to include the letters, has to go through them and redact them if there's some information that somebody feels shouldn't be there. And I understand that in the past, some board members have wanted to read why the person was leaving. Well, sometimes the very reason why they're leaving is what is redacted. And so we're not getting that reason anyway, and so all we're getting is more work for the board secretary than is needed, and satisfying board members as to why people are resigning by reading letters that may or may not contain that information. So there's two possible suggestions. One is simply to go, as Mr. Fisher says, and just list the names of the people who are retiring and or resigning and say, you know, this is the list. And then the other option is that if it is required that board members want to read the letters, then perhaps a confidential collection of those letters as is, without requiring any additional work by the board secretary, could be made available to the board under executive content of the agenda, and people could read them if that is really what they want. But I personally do not necessarily want to read people's resignation letters for reasons why they are leaving. I think some of those, if there's something really pertinent, it will come out in other venues rather than the resignation letter. And I think it's a better place to come out other than the resignation letter. So my suggestion would be that we simply list the names of the people who are resigning and let it go at that.
Are any other comments? Ms. Bowman?
I guess I'm not sure I completely understand the problem, probably because I wasn't here at the last meeting, but what is the amount of time that is spent on this? And are there people who have said they don't want their letter made public? Are the two questions I would have.
I can't speak to the first part. I probably can answer the second question. I'll go first. It's not really necessarily a question of whether there are people who said they don't want their letter to go public. Due to certain confidentiality requirements, sometimes a portion of a letter has to be redacted. And although I heard Mr. Ballard's suggestion, item 2 doesn't cut the mustard with me as well, because you as board members would be seeing something that's not redacted, that really shouldn't even be before your eyes either way. I understand what you're trying to say. As to how much time it takes, I leave that to Mrs. Allen.
It's hard to really put an exact time on it, but I have to read through each one and redact certain information on them to make sure that it's not visible when it's on the agenda. But it depends on how many letters. It could be 2 letters, it could be 15 letters.
I guess, did this come up because you didn't have enough time to do it?
No, someone questioned at the last board meeting why they were redactions.
Oh, okay.
Which is picked up.
Okay.
We've always, as long as I've been here, we've been doing that process.
Yeah. I'm in favor of keeping things open unless there's a problem, and it just doesn't sound like there is one here to me. That's my personal opinion.
Mr. Smith?
Just a quick question. If we decided to go with Mr. Ballard's option 1 and just listed dates, names in the agenda, do we keep those letters anyway on file for a period of time? So that wouldn't change anything on...
They're maintained.
Yeah, okay.
Any other comments? Mr. Champagne?
I mean, since we're not able to see the confidential information anyway, see the point of including the letters, I would simply create a list. I think, I'm assuming in an exit interview or some other process, the administration gets the information that they need from the individual if they're resigning. So I would tend to make it simple and just simply have a list of names and dates and move forward.
Dr. Levinson?
So in addition to names and dates, could we also maybe get the building and the type of position? Because I think, Mr. Champagne in the past has identified a potential issue with a particular staff position, and if we didn't know what that person did, we couldn't bring that up. So I think names, dates, position, building, I think would be a reasonable amount of information.
Currently on now.
Which is on the agenda without
The building and the date.
Yeah. So the part that's on the actual agenda without the letters.
Correct.
Mr. Smith? I just had a follow-up thought. I think, coming into this, I didn't really have an opinion. Now I think I do. I'd like to keep them if we had a preference, just because, well, yes, there's some things that are redacted, and a lot of them read pretty similar for various reasons. There are, every now and then, a couple of letters that come through that, especially retirement letters, are coming from folks who are at the end of a very long career in East Penn and highlight the positive experience that they've had. I would enjoy still reading those. I think it would be a shame if we weren't given access to, or in the community, given access to those stories as well.
Any other comments? I'm in general not in favor of things that reduce information out. I could go either way on this, but it doesn't sound like we have a consensus from the discussion here, so I would say if someone feels strongly about changing how we're doing it, maybe putting a motion on and see how the whole board feels would be the way to achieve that. Thank you. Mr. Ballard?
Well, I'll put a motion in that we simply list the names and positions and buildings of the people who are retiring.
Okay. Thank you.
Can we get a second so we can just,
Well, no, not for this meeting, for next meeting. I don't think it's not our practice to introduce motions and vote on them in the same meeting, so put something on the next board agenda.
Okay.
Thanks. Okay, moving on, we had announcements. We had an executive session before the meeting today. We discussed, would it be? Personnel and negotiation?
And litigation.
And litigation. The next regularly scheduled board meeting is September 9th here at 7:30. I'll now entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Waiting for the night someone opposes the end of the.
Under an hour.
That's a good one.
Meeting adjourned with.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Personnel and litigation.
Sorry. Say to Abby.